It's been a long time since one of the most special and beloved characters in Dogman has been the ex-villain, Petey, the world's most evil cat.
He's not going to ruin my evil plans to destroy all do-gooders.
But do you know the whole story of this antagonist family? And have you heard about the theory of a possible love interest coming to the comics?
Ha ha ha!
One of the most important figures in Petey's life was definitely his mother, Grace. She was a calico cat who first appeared in the 7th edition of the comics titled Dogman For Whom the Ball Rolls. Grace was the partner of Crud, Petey's father. In the past, she was proposed to when the villain stole the Ring of Destiny jewel. However, she wasn't fully aware of the things her partner was up to. Unfortunately, her husband was their only source of income, and when Grace fell ill, Crud's presence would have been very important. But before her illness, she was always a loving and kind mother to Petey. She loved playing the ukulele and taught her son how to play it. She also always encouraged Petey in everything and kept him out of trouble until their family was torn apart. When Grace got sick, her husband abandoned her, leaving their young son without care as well. Grace and Petey moved into the Happy Home Shelter, which was run by Mrs. Pierce, another key figure in the villain cat's life. But we'll talk more about her later. When Grace passed away, Petey lost his only inspiration for good until he met his son in the future. But before we talk about how important the Lil Petey clone is, you might want to grab your popcorn because another super exciting Cinewave episode is about to begin. Think about this phrase, "I never felt any love for him." That's not something you expect to hear from a father talking about his son, but when it comes to Grandpa Crud, a lack of affection is pretty much the norm. Many people think Crud is Petey's father's real name, but it's actually what he calls himself when using his invention, the motor brain, which turns everyone into a version of the Incredible Hulk. Crud, or Grandpa, is the complete opposite of his ex-wife Grace. He's also a crucial character in shaping Dogman's arch-enemy. He first appeared in the 7th edition of the comics, but had already been mentioned by Petey in earlier books. Crud was always a father who showed no affection for Petey. In fact, many believe he's responsible for the injury on Petey's tail. He was also so selfish that he abandoned his sick wife, leaving her to care for their son alone. When he was locked up in cat jail, he told Big Jim about his former partner and showed some regret about it. It seems that Crud already felt a lot of shame for what he did to Grace, but when it came to Petey, he never truly apologized. It was exactly this cruel treatment from his father that pushed Petey into a life of crime. And for those who still don't get it, it wasn't Grace who gave young Petey his intelligence, it was Crud. This villain is a genius, just like his son, capable of creating powerful and evil machines that he uses for crimes. But now, in the 13th edition of Dogman, he's starting to change his mind and become a better person. Could Crud finally tell Petey that he loves him? That would be so emotional! And of course, in a video about Petey's family, we can't leave out Dogman's greatest antagonist. And there are some things about the villain cat that you might not know. For starters, Petey appears in more comics than Dogman himself. He was actually the first character created in this universe. In fact, the ex-villain is based on the author, Dave Pilkey, during his school days. His first ever appearance was in the comic Super Diaper Baby 2, The Invasion of the Potty Snatchers. In this comic, he serves as an assistant to a bank robber. But back then, Petey was a normal four-legged cat who could already talk. In the Dogman comics, Petey's backstory starts being revealed in the 7th edition, with flashbacks to his childhood showing his mother and their life at the shelter after Crud abandoned them. Interestingly, it was at this cat shelter that Petey and his mother met Big Jim. Back then, they were both just kids. Before that, in another flashback, we learn that Petey was kicked out of the Scouts after Piggy, another villain, set him up, making it look like Petey had caused chaos at camp. As you saw in the movie, Petey created a kitten clone of himself, Lil Petey, who is full of love. This is important because if Lil Petey has that personality, it means he inherited all those feelings from his original. Petey was always good deep down, but he was confused. Nowadays, with his son by his side, Petey is rebuilding his life and trying to restore the family he lost. That's why we believe it's about time for Dogman's former rival to find a love interest who could be a mother to Lil Petey. We'll talk about that later, so stay tuned. And what about you? Do you want to see Petey fall in love? Comment #love so we can get to know each other. Lil Petey is probably the most important figure in the villain cat's life. Since he's so young, there isn't much history for this character, but his presence completely changed the Dogman comics. Lil Petey's story begins even before he exists in the comics. Many Dogman movie fans don't know this, but the kitten is actually inspired by the author's mother. Her name was Barbara Pilkey. The ex-villain's son made his first appearance in the 3rd edition of the comics, Dogman: A Tale of Two Kitties. This detail is super important for the future of the movies. The fact that DreamWorks chose to introduce Lil Petey in the first Dogman movie is proof that the next films will adapt more than one book. In the kitten story, Petey wanted a clone to help him commit crimes, but the villain was careless and didn't realize the copy would take 18 years to grow up. Little Petey is a character who chose his own name, and since his personality is based on his original's childhood, we know exactly how Petey felt deep down. At first, their relationship was terrible. The villain tried to abandon the kitten, just like Crud had abandoned him. But Lil Petey won all of our hearts, and today he's a big hero in OK City, known as Cat Kid. Now, alongside Dogman, he fights all kinds of evil with love, kindness, and meows. Now, let's talk about a character who doesn't exist yet, but totally should. Petey's future girlfriend and Lil Petey's mom. Let's call her Mary, like Mary Jane. Get it? Petey and Mary? It would be a cool reference. This character needs to be confirmed in the next Dogman comics because, from the very beginning of the story, Petey lost his family, starting with the great love he once received from his mother. His father never cared about him either, but now the ex-villain has left his life of crime behind and is building a new family. Lil Petey needs a mom who would take great care of him, don't you think? On top of that, a romantic storyline for Dogman's former rival would be an amazing addition to the comics. It could even be hilarious. Imagine if she was the first ever feline cop in the OK City police force and hated Petey at first. But then, little by little, she falls in love with him, and just when they're about to kiss, chaos erupts between them. That would be a fun idea. Did you know that Big Jim is actually Petey's brother? Hold on, they're not related by blood, but they did meet when they were kids. After Crud abandoned his family, his wife Grace couldn't afford to keep their rental home, and they were evicted. That's when they had no choice but to move into a shelter. When they arrived, there was a little kitten named Little Jim, who would later become Big Jim. Grace started taking care of this tiny cat because Big Jim's parents had sadly passed away in a car accident. Petey and his new brother always had a fun dynamic because Big Jim is a wannabe comedian who's constantly trying to make people laugh. But let's be honest, he's not that funny. A lot of fans don't actually know why this character is in jail, but there are some theories. Big Jim hates injustice, and that has led him to take part in some protests and citywide chaos. That could be why he's locked up. One major clue is the protests that happen inside the cat prison. Almost all of them seem to be organized by Big Jim. Another clue is his superhero name. Big Jim is known as Commander Cupcake, a hero who believes that sweets can solve any problem. And hey, maybe he's not wrong. But there's something else important about Petey's adoptive brother. He's also a victim of Crud. That's right, the villainous cat's father has done some terrible things to him too. Petey's dad invented a machine called the Motor Brain, which can transform anyone who uses it into a super muscular monster. When Grandpa Crud used it, he turned into Crud, but before testing it on himself, he needed a guinea pig, and that poor test subject was Big Jim. Petey's adoptive brother was turned into a beast called Snug, because that was the only word he could say. Crud was seriously evil. This machine could have completely destroyed Big Jim's brain. Luckily, things didn't go that far. These days, Dave Pilkey has been giving this character a lot of attention. The 13th book in the series, Dogman Begins, focuses on Commander Cupcake's life as a hero after escaping from jail. But the good news is that the 14th book is already confirmed. It's called Dogman Believe, and is set to release between September and October of 2025. But don't wait until the end of the year to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss our videos every day. There's another character connected to Petey's family, but she doesn't have a big role in Dogman's story. Her name is Mrs. Pierce. She's a human who runs the Happy Home Shelter in the town of Bedford Falls. This is a real place in the Dogman universe, but it's not the main setting of the story. When Crud abandoned his family and Grace took Petey to the shelter, Mrs. Pierce showed up and asked Petey's mom to sign an important document. That's when we first learned Grace's name. Mrs. Pierce is a kind-hearted woman who helps lost kittens, and her favorite one? Big Jim, who became her assistant. Since there weren't any more rooms left for Petey's brother, Mrs. Pierce let him sleep in her office. Alongside Grace, she helped take care of Petey. She was kind, giving him food and shelter. So no one can say Petey didn't experience love before becoming a villain. And yes, the newest member of Petey's family can only be Dogman. This isn't a surprise for anyone who follows the adventures of the crime-fighting pup. The two started off as enemies all the way back when Officer Knight, Dogman's original body, was still around, but nowadays that's all in the past. Thanks to Little Petey's love for Dogman, the police pup has gotten closer to the ex-villain, and now both of them act as father figures to the little clone. You know who else is part of a family? You! Everyone here on our channel is like family, and that's why we've picked out 2 more videos for you to enjoy. See you in the next one.